arguing that Star Wars changed not just the world of visual effects, but film as a whole. And I know what you're thinking. Please don't dive into yet another detailed breakdown about how they did it. And don't worry, we won't. There's a million videos talking about what went into creating the effects in Star Wars, including an amazing docuseries on Disney Plus called Light and Magic. So we'll put some of our favorites below for you to check out if you are one of the 2 people who haven't seen all that. What we are going to do today is take those original ideas they employed in the 70s when making those flying shots and try to replicate the heart of what it was, and without a good enough model. This is the model that we used, a 7-inch toy that you get off Amazon for $23, which a quick and sloppy test showed us that it was a bit too rough. So we looked for something larger and more convincing and decided that was stupid. So I shifted gears and asked my friend Bill Duran over at Punish Props for some help. Bill is a model maker that I have worked with on a bunch of my shorts like Proximity, Sentinel, and Sentry. So I sent my model over to him and he went about repainting it to give it a more pro weathered look and also corrected some glaring issues like the seams here. All of that helped sell this cheap plastic toy model a lot more on camera. And he did an amazing job, including adding this 1/4-20 connection here so that I could easily mount it. Bill also made a full video that he posted to his channel all about how he did this, so check that out in the links below. But now with this much better version of the model in hand, we could set up our motion control and get started, since motion control is exactly how they did it back then on what was essentially an indie film. And speaking of indie film, stick around to the end. There is a relatively new company called Decentralized Pictures, which is a nonprofit founded by some amazing filmmakers with the aim of supporting independent film through financing awards, production services, and mentorship. They're not a sponsor. I don't get any benefit from promoting them. It's just something that is truly great for independent filmmakers with great artists like Kevin Smith, Steven Soderbergh, and Roman Coppola all involved. I'll talk more about it at the end, but if you're feeling impatient, you can jump to the time markers below or the link in the notes. One interesting bit of info from the original Star Wars film is how John Dykstra, who was considered the father of motion control, left the film industry for a bit before the actual film commenced. While working for an institute that was looking to simulate traffic patterns using miniatures, John created a motion control system that became the foundation for what he would bring to Star Wars. And this is the motion control we are using, the Kessler Cineshooter, which we have attached to the Kessler shuttle dolly, so I'll be able to do very precise moves here and control the whole thing off my iPhone. We have a belt here that runs through the slide motor and pulls the whole system along the tracks, and up here is the actual Cineshooter, and it's crazy simple to get going. You just connect to Wi-Fi, open the app, and off you go. Then right at the edge of our motion control system, I do have my model set up on a stand with our green screen behind that. For lighting, I have one hard source with no diffusion hitting our model, acting as the sun, then a bounce on the other side to bring up some detail in the shadows. Then finally, we discovered that we needed a little something extra for the tracking, so I tossed this mic stand at the end of the model with a piece of green tape, and that did the trick. So with all that set, I got my camera set up on the rig and popped on this probe lens I rented from Lens Pro to go. A probe lens lets you get insanely close to objects like we've shown in another episode where I shot the door element for my short There Comes the Knocking, links below for that. But with this on, and thanks to the precision of the motion control, I can get insanely close to the model. At times, it was literally a hair's distance away, and that's going to help us with scale. The next important element for getting this shot was my frame rate. For this, I shifted down to 3 frames per second. When you record at 3 frames per second and play back at 24, you get much faster movement. And there's 2 perks to shooting the model like this. First, I can set my motion control slider to move very slowly while recording 3 frames per second, and when it's played back, I get very smooth, fast motion that feels more accurate to the scale than if I were to shoot straight 24 frames per second. The second and even more important element is the motion blur. Because I'm recording 3 frames per second, the shutter is also opening up more to let more light in for longer stretches of time, which gives us in-camera motion blur that feels correct to the speed and scale of the model, like this here. Whereas if I was shooting 24, we would get more of what you would expect. And of course, you could add that motion blur in post with things like Real Smart Motion Blur, but it just doesn't feel as true or organic as getting it in camera like this. So to get my shot, I'll pick my start position, set that in the Cineshooter app here, move to my final position, set that, and now I can just trigger CineDrive to do my move exactly the same every time, which was very helpful when I flipped around to get the ship flying away from camera, since I did an extra pass with all my lights in the studio off to get just the toys lights from the propulsion that we could comp in later. And the hardest part of shooting the model for me was the angle feel of it. It's wild how the slightest micro-inch move in one direction or another would make the model look like it wasn't straight at camera at all. But finally, with a lot of fiddling around, I had some passes I was happy with, and just with it on green screen, it's already hitting some emotional buttons for me from some nostalgic sci-fi vibes that it already has. So I got extra excited to shoot this over to Thompson for comping. Another thing you can use to hit your audience's emotional nostalgic buttons is today's sponsor, Licked. Last time we talked about Licked was with this ad. Probably my favorite ad that we've made in the last 10 years and inside of one of my favorite episodes too. So if you haven't seen that, definitely check it out in the notes below. But that ad and the episode was loaded with retro music that really made the entire thing work on a whole other level. It really does help tell your story in a heightened way since you have that extra connection to the viewer. And Licked is the only place that I know of that makes that possible for people like us. And it's not just older music either. In here, you can license some of the most popular current tracks too, like this song from Ice Spice and Nicki Minaj from the new Barbie film. And they have the biggest music catalog for creators with 150,000 stock music tracks for any situation and access to the biggest artists to take your production quality up while being protected from copyright claims. And something Licked researched, and is something that we've experienced as well, is that audiences do tend to watch longer and engage more when the viewer recognizes mainstream music. And that, of course, can help grow your channel. The stock licenses can also be used on any social platform with unlimited usage, and they have really helpful search filters and hundreds of curated playlists to help you find what you need. And by supporting Licked, you are supporting the artists as well. And the more creators who use the platform, the more labels Licked can sign on. So it's all just going to keep getting better. So sign up to Licked and use our link below for 14 days free stock music and 50% off your first mainstream chart track. And that is a limited time offer, so be sure to jump on that now. For compositing, we're going to jump over to After Effects and drop our main pass footage into the new comp. And like I mentioned before, we have this additional stand for the tracking as the shot starts with the model off screen. So right click, track and stabilize, track camera. And once that's done, we'll select a tracker which remains on screen the longest. Right click, create null and camera. And before keying, we're going to roto out most of the frame as well as the main stand our ship is connected to. Create a new solid layer to become our alpha matte and make it a 3D layer. Copy and paste the 3D null track position to the solid to place it in the same 3D space, and we're going to change the position and bring it forward slightly to account for the distance between the track stand and the model. Then scale up until it covers the ship throughout the shot. Now set the footage to use the solid as an alpha matte, then using the pen tool we will draw a rough mask around the ship except for the stand, which we will mask close and precise to remove it. Feather the mask slightly and enable motion blur for the layer and comp. Now set a keyframe for the mask and move throughout the timeline, adjusting the mask whenever needed to keep the stand out of view until you have something like this. Once that's done, we'll use key light on our footage layer to key out the green screen, changing a few of the settings until we get a decent key like this. Setting the replace method to source keeps the green spill, so we'll next add an advanced spill suppressor to remove any green from the image, giving us this. For some color and contrast changes to the ship, we're going to first add a curves effect and lower the brighter areas. To bring out more detail from the model and increase the highlights, we're going to use Red Giant's Magic Bullet Looks plugin. Clicking on the tools button shows us all these effects. We're going to use the pop effect in the color correction section and drag and drop it over the image. Increase the pop amount to your liking. We're going to push it all the way up to 100%, then close the window. If you ever want to decrease the amount, you can use this overall strength control, which also lets you see it as is in comp rather than soloed. Next, we're going to add a tint effect with a low amount to dial down the warm color, and lastly, another curves effect to add some contrast and lessen some of that light bounce underneath the ship. For the stars, we used a large texture map scaled up and placed where we wanted in frame. You can get free starry sky textures from places like NASA, Pexels, and Unsplash.com, for instance. The one we're using is too bright for our scene, so we're going to use a curves effect and lower the shadows to make it darker. Some faint flickering animation can also help add interest to an otherwise static background like this. And to do that, we're going to add a fractal noise effect, setting the blending mode to multiply. We're going to boost the contrast and hold the Alt key while clicking the evolution stopwatch to bring up the expressions area. Type in time times 100 to get a smooth, constant animation which controls how bright or dark the stars are in different areas. With this traveling away shot, we wanted to add something for the ship to be going towards, so we ended up using assets from Action VFX Sci-Fi Planets pack. For the main planet, we use this one here, placing it above the stars layer and rotating it to match the same sunlight angle as our practical model. We want to make the planet look more dry and desolate, so first we'll use curves to boost the brightness, a tint to lower the saturation, another curves effect to lower the red, green, and blue channels, and lastly, a hue and saturation effect to set the greens to further desaturate, as well as shift the hue to a warmer tone. To add atmospheric haze to the planet, first duplicate the layer and delete all of the effects except for the tint. Set the strength to 100 and change the white to black. Use a radial shadow effect, making the color white, opacity 100, distance around 0.4 for the scale of this planet, and move the light source to the center. Use a fast blur effect to soften it slightly and a duplicate blur with a higher value, but lower the effect opacity for this one to blend the two blur amounts together. Using a glow effect will lower the threshold and boost the radius to brighten the overall look. To have it fade off into the shadow area, you can use a linear wipe effect, boosting the transition completion to the point we want it to begin, change angle to match the light direction, and increase the feather. For the color, we'll use a tint effect, changing the white to a blue color, then set the blending mode to screen and lower the layer opacity to make it more subtle. We did the same for the smaller planet to the left using this different asset here, rotated and scaled down with the curves to add some contrast, then duplicating and copy and pasting the atmosphere effects over, and then just tweak some of the settings like linear wipe angle, radial shadow distance, glow, and blur amounts, and then set to screen. We also added the deformed moon asset placed near the second planet and scaled way down, then shifted it blue with a hue and saturation effect. With this shot, we also have that second pass with just the lights on, so we're going to drop this into the top of the comp and set the blending mode to screen. Using a hue and saturation, we'll shift the color more tealish. With the curves, we'll crush the shadows and lift the highlights to make it brighter. And for our glow, we'll use Red Giant's optical glow effect, changing the values to get a nice glow spread and boosting the color vibrance. Using another glow, we're going to increase the X size for an anamorphic streak, tint it a dark blue color, and lower the amount to make it pretty faint. On an adjustment layer, we're going to add a new glow with a really low amount and adjusting some of the settings to just give us a subtle wash over the image. Some of the reference shots we looked at have the planets increasing in scale as the camera gets closer. Really, for things of this size to get closer so quickly means the camera must be moving incredibly fast, and in shots like this, there isn't much else to reference speed, such as atmosphere moving past the camera. Above the moon layer, we'll create a new null and link each planet and their atmosphere to it. Keyframe the scale at the start and end of the comp to increase over time. Now we'll pre-comp everything for an overall camera move and shake. Using Red Giant Universe's camera shake, we'll select the boat preset and tweak the settings to make it a bit slower with more X amplitude, rotation, and lower shake amount just to get a bit of a floating motion. You can keyframe this or use another copy to shake faster when the ship passes. We'll also keyframe the scale and rotation to push forward and rotate slightly by the end of the shot. Then with some grain and a grade, we have this. The towards shot was the same process again, 3D camera tracking to use a solid layer as a matte and keying out the green screen, then color correcting the ship and adding the animated stars copied over from the first comp and just repositioning in frame to see a different area of the sky. Obviously, this shot doesn't have any planets or even the ship lights, so we can then complete this with a subtle camera movement, grain, and grade again. Of course, this doesn't fully sell for a modern shot. The model keeps it from fully landing, but if we did upgrade to a larger and more detailed model, this would absolutely sell. And I kind of love the old school sci-fi vibes that we are getting from this model. And hey, maybe that style fits the story that you're trying to tell. And speaking of stories that you're trying to tell, as promised, this is Decentralized Pictures, a nonprofit founded to help independent filmmakers tell their stories. It's a really interesting platform that connects impressive filmmakers and a whole community, where they utilize transparent curation and an autonomous reward system that allows the community to vote on who receives the financing rewards. Rewards like their latest Sidewinder Films Completion Fund Award. This is $200,000 to finish your film, as well as a mentorship from Sidewinder Films and DCP. They're always adding new rewards, so definitely check it out all in the notes below, along with everything else that we talked about in today's episode. And until next time, don't forget to write, shoot, edit, repeat.